All right, everyone, another major migrant riot over in Europe, this time in the Netherlands, in Den Hague, part of a country that I've never actually seen. A couple of Eritrean street gangs, I guess there were rival sort of gang and ethnic factions there. They decided to pop off and attacked one another. Naturally, the police are called, and then it escalated into a riot, and they burned a number of vehicles, a tractor-trailer, I believe a city bus, if I remember correctly, and several police cars. And of course, there's going to be topical damage to surrounding structures, etc., raging for several hours, actually. You bus burning in the middle of the street, it takes a while to clean it up. And I was thinking, here Wilders, of course, weighed in and said, enough is enough, the Dutch people are done with this. I can understand, because if you look at the Netherlands, for the most part, people there, they just consider themselves Dutch, including some ethnic minority groups. Other than up in Friesland, there's a bit of a separatist activity there, but you don't really get Frisians randomly crossing out of their province in order to go and raid nearby villages or something like that. Doesn't really happen. It's just not a thing. All over Europe, again and again, we see that historical boundaries have been sort of put in the past. Like the average person living in Bavaria, they would conceive of themselves as German. The fact that Bavaria was once an independent country doesn't really play a role. Somebody from one of the German miners, those ones that were so convoluted and fun to deal with when you were Prussia and Victoria too, those people still, nevertheless, they consider themselves to be German all over Europe, with the borders that really didn't get stabilized until the last century for the most part, basically post-World War II. People generally identify themselves as that national origin, especially, I think, partially because of the Cold War era. And so people develop more of a national identity. In the decadence fall of the Soviet Union, thereafter, with the Iron Curtain receding, the reunification of Germany, etc., that has lessened, I think, somewhat. And so you get postmodernist globalist groups trying to create, for instance, the mythology of the European. Well, it's not really, you're trying to do the United States thing, and it doesn't really translate very well. United States, everyone speaks one language, for example. That's not the way that it works in Europe. I guess you could Klaus Schwab next to say everyone should learn Esperanto when they're in school in Europe. This needs to be a policy from Brussels. That'll go over real well. The odds are you'd have to use English as the lingua franca, and it would be very, very strange because, of course, the UK is not part of the European Union. But anyway, we see this time and time again. We're seeing this in Germany. We're seeing it in France. We're seeing it all over the place. Another thing that I noticed in my time in Europe is that you have far less among the Dutch, but watching the European news and seeing things from Hungary and Germany and everywhere else, also over in Britain and surrounding by Turkey and places like that, Italy. And one thing I noticed was that the coverage of this kind of violence tends to be more, it's quieter. Especially in Britain, Stan, by the way. The British somehow managed to outdo the Europeans in this particular aspect of political correctness. It's not covered as much. It's spoken of in softer language. Excuses are made for the violence. Well, they had a grievance against city service. They had a grievance against some other group which back in their home country oppressed them. Or saying Hutu and Tutsi in some European country, they take out the machetes. Everyone becomes nervous. And that's how it works. But when you have a largely peaceful protest attempt, like tractor protest, trucker protest, Frisian farmer uprising, something like that, it gets condemned widely by many political movements anyway. And the legacy media in Europe treats it as though it's like a big threat and a terrible day. So a couple dozen tractors is deemed more newsworthy than something like this, which resulted in a bunch of injuries, a great deal of property damage. City buses ain't cheap, but it's talked about relatively less. I mean, some of the reporting on this is coming from outside of Europe, like U.S. news sites and stuff like that. They'll focus on it, mainly for self-serving purposes. because their audience, of course, wants them to draw a comparison to the U.S. migrant crisis. Illegals in the sense of the United States. I would say the United States has this crisis on a much different level. And partially the damage is more on the economic and social fabric side as opposed to rioting street gangs. That indeed is true, which is perhaps advantageous. But it's at a scale greater magnitude. The United States, of course, has a largely unguarded border. The European countries are trying to do a little bit better, but it's hit or miss. The problem is you have a patchwork Europe with a patchwork set of laws and no real central unity as far as what they're doing border-wise. So you have people that were behind the Iron Curtain. They're very, very skeptical of taking in diversity. Then you have the more decadent Western European side. It's more cosmopolitan. I would point out, though, that if you interact for any length of time with enough Dutch people, you're going to find there is an actual traditionalistic outlook, like, hey, Netherlands needs to remain Dutch and we're proud of our culture sort of thing. So all hope is not lost. Klaus Schwab and his people and the retards in Brussels will try to blackpill you and convince you that everyone except for you is in favor of mass migration and you're the outlier. That's not my experience. I'm just saying that. It's chaos. And I saw some footage from it. It's a remark. It's almost like it's almost on the level of like the George Floyd Summer of Hate riots, fiery but mostly peaceful. Only I didn't see a burning Wendy's this time. I don't know if there are any Wendy's in Europe, actually. I think there are. I think they're actually expanding, which is kind of funny. I know KFC is all over the fucking place. If you go to the Netherlands or parts of Germany, you see KFC goddamn everywhere. It's like over here it has a bad reputation for being like subpar and people prefer Chick-fil-A or something like that. And over there it's like, nope. And the Colonel feeds us the fried chicken. And it's really, really funny and it's hilarious. And America has definitely extended its corporate tentacles into all the major cities of Europe at this point. But this sort of thing shouldn't be happening. It's entirely avoidable. The answer is quite simple. Well, then don't admit migrant groups that are, currently in your country because there's no real necessity to do so. Everyone wants to be generous and help people that are in need, and nations try to pledge to take a certain number of refugees when there's like a war or something. Like, Rutland got a few Syrian refugees, for example. Became a big issue. In the end, the number of refugees that came to the Rutland area from Syria was very, very small. Originally, I think it was going to be a few hundred people. And it was pitched to the public as well. Our economy is faltering and our population keeps lowering, so we're going to import a few hundred people. And people bitched about it enough, so in the end it was like 6 families. It was a handful of people, like a few dozen. It hasn't caused any problems, but I mean, that's because it's not mass migration now, is it? When you have significant blocks of people from a far different culture within your country, especially in urban areas where they're going to tend to settle for jobs mainly, then you can end up with problems because not everyone that comes over is good, honest, wants to work hard, get an education, get ahead, and be part of your assimilated culture. Many do. The greatest instance of this was with the Syrian refugees. The problem was not people fleeing war, especially women and children. That's not the problem. The problem is that other people that have ill intent will filter in with them. They're going to tend to congregate in certain areas where they're more familiar with their neighbors. So you'll have a Syrian-speaking neighborhood or something. And then a couple ISIS members infiltrate. And they begin intimidating the local population and drawing manpower from it by force. That's really the problem. Or you get street gangs. Like these don't appear to be terrorism linked. They appear to be street gangs. You get crime. We've got that here in Vermont. Vermont didn't really have this problem until recently. Our big problem was homegrown meth up until the fentanyl era. Now it's all, people from New York City mainly come in and sell drugs and do crazy shit. When you see Vermont man in the news headlines, it's a 90% chance that person was not born in the state of Vermont, for example. Just saying, there's a little bit of a differential there. That's about all. Peace out.